good afternoon, and welcome to Take a Lunch Break with Christopher Cabaldon, the Mayor in Residence for Institute for the Future. This is Jessie Ryan. I am Executive Vice President at the Campaign for College Opportunity, and I am proud to have an opportunity to host this conversation today, the third in our 2022 series of lunch break conversations with fascinating leaders in higher education. It is my extreme pleasure to welcome Christopher Cabaldon to today's dialogue. Thanks for joining us, Christopher.
It's great to be with you, Jessie. Thank you.
So I have to tell you, as I kick off today's conversation, that this is a bit of a fangirl experience for me. I've had the opportunity to watch your leadership from afar and to work with you in various capacities over the course of more than 15 years. And I find you to be one of the most extraordinary individuals that I've ever had the pleasure of interacting with. So to have an opportunity to interview you in today's lunch break is truly a dream come true.
Oh, I feel the same. We've been together for so much of each other's careers, and this is but we never get a chance to talk. So what we're going to be discussing today in our conversation is going to be a rare treat for us too.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear, Christopher. So I'm going to actually spend a couple minutes reading a bit from your bio. I think that we had 2 pages of your life experiences and accomplishments that we could easily share with the audience of today's conversation, but I'm trying to condense it down to 2.5 paragraphs. And so please bear with me. For those of you who are joining us on today's conversation for our Take a Lunch Break series, Christopher Cabaldon is an incredible leader and for more than decades led West Sacramento as its mayor, transforming what was a forgotten old industrial town into what's now the fast-growing entrepreneurial city at the forefront of an emerging American metro. A story that was told in Governing's feature, Small City, Big Goals, how an unconventional mayor is beating the system. An appointed official for both political parties, Christopher currently represents California on the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education. He previously served as Vice Chancellor of the California Community Colleges, former Director of the State Legislature's Higher Education Committee, and National President for the Asian and Pacific Americans in Higher Education. He's a board member for EdSource, College Promise, California Competes, and an advisory council member for the California Education Lab. Christopher Cabaldon is also the founding partner at Capital Impact, a Sacramento-based firm which propels breakthrough ideas, programs, and policies through a strategy-driven design, capacity building, program management, policy, and philanthropy advising to the social sector. In 2019, Christopher Cabaldon was appointed as a tenured faculty post at Sacramento State University as the Hazel Kramer Endowed Chair and Professor of Public Policy and Administration. He now serves in the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education and as Mayor in Residence at the Institute for the Future. And we're going to hear from Christopher in just a moment. But before we turn over this conversation to Christopher to hear more of his thoughts and talk about his remarkable life experiences, I'd like to just welcome all of you who are joining us from throughout the state. We're going to kick off today's conversation, as we always do in our lunch break series, by taking a quick poll so that we understand who is joining us in this virtual space. Jackie, if you can please pull up the poll. We'd like you to answer 2 questions. First, tell us who you are. Are you a higher ed advocate, student, college faculty administrator, a policymaker, ledge staff, or other? And what region are you joining us from? We'd love to know if you're from the Bay Area, Central Valley, Inland Empire, or Los Angeles. 2 quick questions so that we know who's in the virtual space. We're going to go ahead and close out this poll in a few seconds. So please, if you haven't already selected your sector and the region of the state that you're joining us from, please do. And as we close out this poll, we're going to get a chance to see where you are and who you are. So the vast majority of those joining us are higher education advocates, and we also have a good showing from college faculty and administrators, and a fairly large category of others. So I'm interested in learning more about that. Looks like the vast majority of those who are joining us from throughout the state are from the Bay Area, with a close second from the Central Valley. So thank you again for taking an hour out of your day to join us for today's conversation. And we're going to just jump right in. We don't have a lot of time, but we have a lot of ground to cover. Christopher, I have to tell you, I was thinking about this the other day. I was a recent college graduate and had been selected to participate in the Institute for Developing Emerging Area Leaders, which was a Great Valley Center program developed by Coro. And it was at our graduation ceremony that you were selected as the keynote speaker. And that was the first time I ever heard of you and had an opportunity to see you in action. And I will say that speech left an incredible impression. I remember you as being not only brilliant and visionary, which are often adjectives used to describe you, but I also remember you being incredibly authentic and generous in sharing your life experience and how your values and personal experiences contributed to the vision that you were trying to institute in West Sacramento and beyond. I'd like to ask you to take us a bit back to the experience that you had as a Filipino American growing up in California. Many who are joining us might not know that you were a part of the LA Unified School District and that shaped part of who you are today and your educational equity goals and agenda. Would love to hear from you, Christopher. Tell us a little bit about how that life experience, those early years in LA Unified School District, helped compel you to lead in the way you do today with your focus on educational equity.
Wow. Well, thanks again, Jesse. That was a really generous introduction. It's so terrific to be with you. This question about me growing up as a Filipino American in California is an interesting. When I was growing up, being Filipino was the weekend activity that I went to my grandfather's house and we ate and sang and danced and played mahjong and poker and other games. But it wasn't an identity because I was growing up in a part of LA in which there were no other Filipinos other than my family. And so LA, yes, was a big, diverse region, but it was also highly segregated. And I remember when Kamala Harris, in that famous moment when she said, "That girl was me," when she got on the bus in 1969. I got on the bus a decade later because my mom enrolled me in the very first magnet school in California for voluntary integration after a federal judge ruled that LA school district was unconstitutionally segregated. And my mom was a Slovak Scottish woman, and my dad a Filipino man. And she understood the importance of having just sort of recently experienced racial issues from a different lens, being married in a time when in many states that was illegal to be for a white woman and a Filipino and be married. So she wanted me to experience something different. So she sent me off to this school an hour away from home in LA. And it was the center of the desegregation debate in California. So LA's hope for avoiding mandatory busing by having this one school for a district of hundreds of thousands of people. And it fired in me an appreciation for equity and for integration, but also really thinking about those issues in a pretty profound way when I was in 7th grade, because I was sent on the speaker circuit doing a lot of media interviews. Hey, kid, who are you going to have lunch with today? I'm like, I don't know. Are you going to have lunch with the Korean kids from Central LA, or I've never thought about this. And so as a young man, I started to become very political around issues of educational equity and what that really meant, what integration really meant. And it has guided me ever since. It helped me find my voice, and I've never shut up since. And that has been the through line of the work that I've done since then.
Well, we are glad that you've never been silent since. I read once, Christopher, that ever since you were a young boy, that you just kept copious notes of ideas, journals about things you wanted to do and be, and ideas that you had for contributing to society. I read that you were at a very early age described as someone who was driven, brilliant. But what we saw from you as an elected leader in West Sacramento was that you also were incredibly committed to living your value of educational equity. You did so much in your time as mayor of West Sacramento to actualize a vision of educational equity. And that looked like putting forth and creating policies from preschool all the way through college that could help ensure that all students, irrespective of their income level or the color of their skin, would have an opportunity to thrive in that city. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that work you did? Because you were, frankly, on the cutting edge of things like free college tuition and access to universal preschool before those were popular policies being lifted up across the state and across the country.
Yeah, it's kind of an impossible story in my own community because it seems kind of totally unbelievable. Um, I having come from the world of higher education and K-12 education into the mayor's office, at the beginning I thought, well, this is not my job here. My job is I got to make the sewers flush, and we got to put out the fires. Like education, that's my other life, and never shall the two intersect. And I spent a lot of time working on recruiting new companies to the city, trying to build jobs. And I kept looking at the numbers and saying, hey, our employment, our job numbers are going way up, but our unemployment rate is not going down at all. And there's a problem here. We're getting better and better jobs, and yet we have this massive gap for unemployment we have for generations. And it's clear we have a skills gap in our community, and we have to tackle it in a different way. So I started taking baby steps at the beginning, and by baby steps I mean we decided to become the first medium or small size city in California to do universal preschool, to connect every child to high quality preschool in our city with the help of the cigarette tax money that was enacted in the early part of the 2000s. The community is like, how are we doing this? This is impossible. We're a poor, working class community. How is this happening? I think, well, there are people, philanthropies, agencies that are looking for places just like ours to prove that you can really change the world. So how do we tee ourselves up to be the place where change makers and change investors want to plant their flag? So we succeeded, and building on that success, we built the partnerships and got through a lot of fights too at the local school district and elsewhere to try to build a comprehensive system. Vice Chancellor at UC Davis got elected to the city council, and so here I was a former vice chancellor of the community college. Here we are, we're 40% of the city council. Let's do something big. So we built on the preschool piece and added on to that college savings accounts for every single child entering kindergarten from preschool. Then we added digital badges for high school students who are engaged in community service or building skills or just learning how to produce videos on YouTube on their free time. How do we mark that social capital that they're building in a way that can matter for college? And how do we give scholarships, which we now offer at the city as well, scholarships for community service too. Then we became the first, one of the first cities in the country to actually do the free community college program, as you noted. And President Obama invited me to serve on the national board for it. And back home, it wasn't just the programs, it was also the sense that, hey, even a town like ours can do world-changing things and make a difference. And that sense of possibility is really important, not because the programs alone aren't enough. You have to convince other change actors in the community activists, teachers, administrators, business owners. Yeah, okay, we could do something here, right? That's a big part of what political action is all about. Then I think that the piece that at the end, when I left office 2 years ago, the last program that I did, which is one of the ones that I thought was the coolest, was I said, look, like when you go from 5th grade to 6th grade, it just happens, right? You should do that. If you're going from 11th grade to 12th grade, you don't apply, you don't like cross your fingers hoping you're going to get in again. Why do we have this barrier between 12th grade and the first year of college? We know that every good job in our future economy is going to require some form of post-secondary education. So why do we treat it like that's like you cross your fingers and good luck to you? Why don't we treat it like 11th to 12th grade or 6th to 7th? So I got the local superintendent of the school district and the community colleges in the region together, and we sent a letter of admission to every single high school, every single graduating high school senior. They didn't apply. You just got it. Okay, Jessie Ryan is home. She gets home. She opens up her mail. There's a letter saying, Jessie Ryan, congratulations. You have been accepted for admission to Sacramento City College. Oh, yeah. And here's a letter from the mayor. You have received a scholarship and free tuition. This is can we make it that seamless? Rather than counseling people how to get through this horrible process, why don't we just make it not a process any longer in order to make that simple? Now, it didn't require any money. Because you're already able to go to Sacramento City College. It's not competitive. But most students don't know that. And even better, our hope was maybe Jesse's grandmother will be the one that opens up the mail that day. And she says, "Oh, yeah," or, "Oh, Jesse, I'm so proud of you. I didn't even know you were going to college." And then Jesse has to say, "Yeah, Grandma, I'm going to college," right? At that moment, you don't want to disappoint Grandma, so you're going. So we're trying to insert ourselves in ways to make it simple, to get the resources there, but also understand that the culture of decision making that students and their families have to make. So that in a nutshell, I think that was one of the things we call it the West Sacramento home run, where we really focused on how do we uplift and create real direct seamless pathways to social mobility for everybody in our community.
So there's so much that I love about what you said about creating that seamless path from preschool through college for students. And essentially what you're articulating is what we've long known, that students don't do optional, and that it's quite often our least privileged and networked students and families that understand the educational opportunities that are available to them. And so you have essentially, removed the guesswork and ensured that all students really do have a level playing field, that it's more than just a slogan. And I think it's incredible. And you're right, if people see that that can be done in West Sacramento, we say it can be done anywhere. I'm going to just jump right into something, because you talked about pathways to upward economic mobility. This year was an exciting year for us at the Campaign for College Opportunity. We saw Governor Newsom take a stated commitment over the course of many years of doing something to create a North Star for educational attainment, and putting it into his state budget, putting it into the goals that he's articulating for an economic recovery path after the pandemic, and helping to re-enroll students across the state. So Governor Newsom and his administration have instituted a 70% attainment goal. Very ambitious goal. We had talked about a 60% attainment goal at the Campaign for College Opportunity in the past. They went even further. They said we need a North Star of a 70% attainment goal, and we need to have the goals within that 70% attainment North Star to help move all of our students in our state to higher degree completion. I'd love to ask you, why is that significant? Why is that needed at this moment in time? And what's the power of an attainment goal with that kind of an ambitious framework?
It's a huge move, and it's a very smart one. I think we're at now about 20 years of the history of compacts between between governors and higher education. This one is the most detailed, and even some of the critics are like, "There's 55 things in here," but that's because there's 50 ways to leave your lover, and there's 55 things you must do if you're going to advance. This project isn't enough, like many of the other states in the West, for example, and a majority of the states in the West, 2/3 of them have attainment goals, but many of them are just goals and there's nothing underneath that, or they're goals that are set by some nameless, faceless state agency that doesn't actually have the power to do anything to make it happen. So it isn't enough just to have a goal. Here we have the most ambitious goal in the West. It's 70% as opposed to 60 or 65. But backed up by a set of very serious, discrete, actionable things that are needed in order to make that goal happen. So it isn't just declaring it and saying, "Here's $5 in order to hit 70%. It is, we're going to make a big investment, and we're going to make a predictable investment, both for institutions. So UC and CSU and community colleges say, "Yeah, come, because we'll be able to offer the classes and make the space available." But also for students, that if we're going to make that degree attainment goal happen, it has to be stable. It has to be predictable. There can't be tuition surprises that hit you in the junior year. You have to be able to graduate on time. You have to know that the state and institutions are doing what it takes in order to get you to succeed and get that graduation, that certificate, or that degree that you're going for. It has to be debt-free. And so the compacts invest in scholarships and learning aligned programs and Cal grants and funds for dreamers. It has to be as seamless as possible. Like, so the transfer between a community college and UC or CSU is just like going from elementary school to secondary school. Yeah, it's going to happen. Yeah, you got to fill out a form, you got to show up, but that's it. It's going to happen. Integrated admission, integrate common learning management systems, course numbering systems. These are boring things to the public, but they are absolutely essential if we're going to hit that degree attainment goal. But then I think the other key part of this is that this is the first time the degree attainment goal really looks to adults too. in a significant way. It's not just about what we always obsess about, which is the high school graduating seniors, which are core, but also all those adults. California Competes just did a report last year that said 40% of working adults in California say that they intend to go to college in the next 2 years. That's an unimaginable number. And most of them will not do so. Most of them don't have access to do it, but there is the demand there. So a degree attainment goal of 70% sounds very ambitious, and it is unprecedented in its imagination and its ambition, but it's very doable because there are so many adults that are chomping at the bit, knowing that the pathway to social mobility and to career progression is higher education. And at the same time, so many young people are completing the A to G requirements. They are graduating from high school in numbers that we've never seen before. So the demand is definitely there by students and by adults, and the demand is there in the economy. And the compacts, I think, are exciting both because of the amount of dollars that are there and the goals that are set, but also in the real smart investments that are being made in those specific actions and tactics that are going to be needed in order to accomplish those goals.
So we're going to come back to talk about the compacts a little bit more, but I know there's a lot of dialogue happening right now in the chat, and I do want to share with those of our listeners and audience members who are joining today's conversation that we will have an opportunity in a few minutes to ask questions of Christopher Cabaldon. So for those of you who are already generating a thoughtful dialogue in our chat, hold those questions, drop them in, and we'll get to as many as we can in the latter part of this discussion. Christopher, I want to come back to two things you said. Absolutely, this emphasis that the compact and the attainment goals have around adult learners is key. It's in particular key at this moment in time, given the lasting impacts of a pandemic that has turned into an endemic. But in addition to that, I want to talk about what you said, that part and parcel of the attainment goal of the compacts and the ability to see those goals through is debt-free college education, is affordability. You know, we at the Campaign for College Opportunity have talked about the interconnectedness of the Cal Grant Equity Framework and the compact goals. If we cannot ensure that we are covering the total cost of attendance for our students, we will not see our students both enroll, progress, and then complete in a timely fashion. For those who are listening and might not understand the significance of goal setting, of having multi-year frameworks and compacts that are intersystematic, can you talk a little bit more about why this is necessary for California at this moment in time?
Yeah, the goals are critical. They're not enough, but they are definitely necessary in order to bring together all these different other strategies that need to happen. Now, we know what needs to be done. Like I've been working in higher education. I was staffer to the Assembly Higher Education Committee in 1989, and all of these topics, Cal Grants, transfer, common course number, all of them have been present for a long time. So it's not like we don't know what needs to be done and what we need to build in order to deliver on it. But you have to have an organizing principle. You have to have a through line, and the attainment goals are critical for one, knowing whether we're getting there, what our progress is, but also keeping why are we at this, especially when we're looking to serve populations that we haven't in the past. It's easy enough to just put the system on autopilot and say, hey, as long as we're serving the top 1/3 at CSU and the top 12.5% at UC, and we're not turning anybody away from a community college, then that's good enough. That's meeting the needs from 1960, but that's not meeting the needs of now. Without a central long-term and near-term goal for what you're going to produce in terms of degrees, you miss the mark. And also without a goal, we often in California tended to make investments in single things. Okay, if we just fund admissions, but we don't think about success because it's how many students are we admitting? That's not good enough. That's why the degree attainment goal is so critical. Or even today, if we just fund basic needs, then that'll do it. Well, we're funding basic needs for the purpose of making it possible for a young mother or a young father to be able to go and earn their degree, get that degree. We can score it on our dashboard for the degree attainment goal, but do so in a way that allows them to support their families, to finish their degrees, and the only way to do that is to have a goal that allows it for it all to come together. So you described it as a North Star. That's exactly right. Other states have these goals. As I said, I think 13 or 12 or 13 of the other states just in the West have degree attainment goals, and some of them work and some of them don't. Many of the ones that don't work because haven't worked because they are they've been adopted by, as I say, like a state agency that here's our goal, but that's not the state agency that has anything to do with the budget. It's not a state agency where the institutions come together. So it's a goal without any action. And here, I think in California, we have enough experience now to know that, yes, we need to be ambitious. We need to lead just like we always have in higher education in the world here in California, but we need to lead both with the goal and with the strategies and tactics underneath it.
I love that. Actionable goals with strategies and tactics attached to it. I'm going to ask one more quick question before we have a final wrap up before we open to audience Q&A. And this is directly related to what is part and parcel of the campaign's heartbeat, and that is racial equity. You know, we have seen a disturbing decline in enrollment for our Black and Latinx students in particular at community colleges in this pandemic world. So under this recognition of the compacts and attainment goal as an essential North Star, can you talk a bit about why there is a racial equity imperative associated to actionable multi-year compacts?
Yeah, in California, in some sense, California was one of the inventors of the basic concept that higher education is the most important driver of social mobility and for equitable achievement of social mobility. Our creation of the community college system and the notion of transfer was California's big play, saying, yeah, it's possible to be both excellent and equitable at the same time. Now, we have never lived up to the vision that we laid out in that master plan that we all have revered, but the concept is still right. It's still right. It's more right than it ever has been before. So we cannot, given the changes in our state and global economy, we cannot deliver equity in wealth. We can't deliver equity in things like housing or desegregate. We can't deliver any of those without fully equitable, not just access, but attainment of what higher education has to offer in the economy. And it is the single most important driver of wealth and income, especially access to full degrees. And to certificates. Simply enrolling students isn't good enough. And in fact, often that can be more harmful than good, right? We say, hey, come to college. We don't have the supports. We don't have the transfer pathways. We don't have the scholarships or what have you. Come for a year, don't finish, with a bunch of debt. We've worsened the equity crisis. And that's been, higher education has a lot to answer for, frankly, over the last 2 decades in how much we have contributed to racial inequality. But this is now our opportunity, and the compacts, I think, really put this front and center. And in every component of the compacts, equity is at the core of it. And now higher education will be called to account. Can we deliver? And we must.
Christopher, that was so powerful and beautifully said. I just want to repeat that. I mean, what you've said is that this is the single most important driver for racial equity, that we cannot deliver equity in wealth, in housing. We cannot deliver equity in any facet of California society without this kind of laser focus and intentionality. Such a powerful, powerful statement. So we're going to open it up to a few audience member questions. And don't worry, we'll come back to Christopher with a final question. And I know a viewer favorite, which is our lightning round. So we'll have a chance to hear more from Christopher on a variety of topics. But first, we want to open up to our audience members who have been patiently sitting by and adding questions to the queue. So we're going to go ahead and start with one question that was shared about the college promise, about your commitment to ensuring that we have a more seamless student pathway. Given the realities of the current student experience, individuals want to know, what makes you pause for thought? What are you grappling with when it's related to how our budget is prioritizing or failing to prioritize student success?
Well, I think the good news is our budgets increasingly are prioritizing student success in the right ways. It's been, as long as you and I have known each other, Jesse, the state legislature and governors have put equity at the top. and student success at the top. This is one of the early projects that we worked on together was the student success task force in the community colleges that ultimately led to major changes in the way that that system functions and the current visions for success that have been working. So it hasn't been for lack of will necessarily, but right at this one moment in 2022, we have both institutions that are ready. We have a governor's office and a legislature that is fully committed and ready, and because of the pandemic, have many of these issues core in their sights, and also an understanding that we can't just go back, right? So the one option is that's close to us is returning to 2018. So we're going to have to do something different. So why don't we do the things different that we already knew needed to be done in order to advance equity? But the other key is that right now we have money, and it's, you know, I'm old enough to remember 4 recessions in higher education, and so also no, we will not have money for very long. And so for me, one of the key aspects for the equity agenda is taking direct, strong actions right now with those resources. Not only thinking about how do we plan for 10 years, what's a 3-year process with the task force for how we should put equity at the center of our budgeting. 3 years from now, we may not have the kind of resources that we have today. So we need to be making those investments in the kinds of key priorities that the campaign has been identifying year after year after year, crossing some off the list year after year as well. But this is the moment at the state and regional and local scale to really bring those to life while we have the resources to make a real difference.
That's right. I mean, I also remember, Chris, some really bad budget times when we were trying to talk about how do you cut from a menu of options and do the least harm, right? And so this is a very different dialogue that we're having: innovation, investment, using this crisis and this influx of one-time dollars to do good, to close opportunity gaps. One of our questions comes from Mark Gaskins, who wants to know, how can we ensure that the attainment goals and the compacts have the appropriate accountability? Because goals without accountability will not lead to the improved outcomes that we need.
Yeah, I've been grappling with this question a lot, and we all have in California ever since the demise of our CPAC, our coordinating agency, California Post-Secondary Education Division. But really trying to think about is there a structure that can accomplish that? And I have to say, since we're just having a casual lunch here, that I'm not convinced that there is anymore. That a structural solution to accountability on the goals is desirable, but I'm not sure it's achievable. And it's one of the reasons why I have become more a fan of the compact approach, because ultimately, what the only actor in the system that can work with the institutions in a way that has credible accountability behind it is the governor, who at least initiates and is a key driver of what the budget looks like. That some other and this is where other states have struggled too. They've set up independent commissions, or they have an existing board that's reviewing it. But in the end, it's like, well, if you're the University of Arizona, just like you were, UC Santa Cruz, like, why do I care? There isn't real accountability that can be built into a system where the university, for example, has constitutional autonomy. But the other piece is, it isn't the other fantasy that we sometimes indulge ourselves in is that, like, the president of the University of California runs the University of California, or that the president at Cosumnes River College is in charge of the college. The attainment goals are achieved by the counseling center, by the women's resource center, by the office that's funding basic skills, by the faculty who are designing transfer pathways. It's a whole of system approach to that success. It's holding a president or a board accountable sounds right, but I'm no longer convinced that is the pathway towards really achieving the goal. So these 4 to 5 year goals, like the compacts have been doing, that are very specific and have lots of specific investments underneath them, I think are the best combination of short-term accountability with the long-term vision.
Thank you, Christopher. Excellent response. We have a question from Karen Zamariba, who I know you've worked with in past roles over the course of many years. Karen notes that equitable financial aid is critical to making college a reality for all. Wanted to know, how do we strengthen the political will to invest in adequate Cal Grants so that we can ensure that students have the aid they need to be able not to just enroll in college, but progress and complete.
Yeah, this area is both been exciting. I think we should congratulate ourselves as a higher ed community about how much we've moved the Cal Grant ball down the field over the last couple of years, and even over the last decade or so. We've made dramatic progress in improving the Cal Grant program, but there's so much more to do for exactly those reasons that for many students of all ages, adults included, the prospect of going to college or to the university seems impossibly distant due to the lack of financial aid and increasing awareness about the challenges of debt. That today's generation is much less interested in taking on this ungodly amount of debt without knowing how they're going to repay it. So part of it is that access question. The other is the attainment question, because students who are overworking too many hours because they cannot get an adequate aid package are highly unlikely to succeed. And we're wasting their time and their hopes, and we're wasting our time and our money, frankly, in tricking them along that way. So these increased investments are key. At the same time, I think it's essential that we're building a sustainable Cal Grant program, because, as you said, when a recession comes along, we need to have built a program that is built to last. And so that's the challenge in times like this, where we have a lot of one-time money to spend, and we have some ongoing money to spend. That we need to make significant investments while also assuring that we're not creating a false promise that 3 years from now the Cal Grant program is going to be #1 on the chopping block. And I think that's going to be one of our key issues. But the Cal Grant program and at the federal level are going to be the core programs. The other piece of it, I think, we have to make it easier for families and students to know and to be able to project what they can get and what they're going to get. Right. This was the whole point of that automatic admission thing that we were doing, is that you shouldn't find out from your FAFSA what aid you're going to get. You should be able to put it in, just like I can type in right now, if things go the way I expect, here's what I'll get from Social Security in 100 years from now. You should be able to do this when your baby's born. You should be able to get online and say, here's what my projected Cal Grant are going to be. So you can start planning all the way through and not waiting and waiting for the lottery to hit you when your Cal Grant award letter comes in the senior year. So the more we use data systems and predictive analytics and other technology to be able to make it more predictable, the aid packages that we already have, we can improve access and attainment as well.
Yes, no, Christopher, you've brought up so many points that I know our listeners and audience members can relate to. I was one of those students that benefited from the Board of Governors fee waiver, which is now the Promise Grant and the Cal Grant. And I also worked about 30 to 35 hours a week to be able to make it through college in 5 years. This idea of community college transfer in 2 years, I was one of 4% that actually did that by going to 3 campuses simultaneously. We need a Cal Grant equity framework that is predictable, that is accessible, that students understand because it is aligned with Pell, and that needs a long-term commitment that we are not putting on the chopping block as we're grappling with budget cuts year to year, because we know, based on the data that the Campaign for College Opportunity has done on return on investment, these investments pay off for the students, for the state. A couple more questions, Christopher, that we have. We talked about the role of the compacts in helping us meet our future workforce imperative. You have a tremendous breadth of experience working on regional collaboratives and ensuring that regional goals are part of making those statewide goals and commitments a reality. Can you talk a little bit more about the function of regional collaboratives in meeting the statewide multi-year compact goals?
Yeah, this is a really exciting area of what's happening in higher ed right now. And I come to it from working at the regional scale on things like housing and sewer systems and economic development and transit lines and air quality and climate change. And in the education space, it's been much less of a thing. That in higher ed, we tended to think about how is UC relating to community colleges, or how are they relating to K-12 more generally. But for most students, both traditional college age and adults, their ecosystem for higher education, for most of them, not the Yale-bound ones or even but for most of them, it's place-based, right? But our systems are not, they're never organized that way. And so that a lot of the potential of workforce, college to workforce pathways, to better data system integration, to some of the seamlessness that we're talking about, even the home run program that I was describing in my city was only possible at the regional scale, right? So that's because that potential is very profound. But we're now starting to see some of that emerge. So one of the items from last year's state budget was $250 million, which is I think that's still a lot of money, a lot of money still. $250 million for the 13 regions in California to collaborate on equity-centered, interinstitutional, like this transfer-related seamlessness, student aid stuff at the regional scale. $250 million. So those applications are out right now. They're due in a month. Regions are scrambling, trying to figure, and they're figuring out bold plays in that space. There's also another $25 million for workforce investment boards to do the same thing, and another $600 or $700 million coming out for economic resilience in a couple of months. When you think about also at the regional scale, so the workforce system, the K-16 system, plus the overall regional economies, including a lot of community activists and other worker-led voices that have been at the table before, have an enormous amount of resources to work together and to undertake really bold actions at the regional scale that they never had before, including and especially linking toward these pathways and bringing that place-based focus. So you're able to say, how do we assure that what we're doing at the regional scale is going to land in your old school board district in Oak Park, or in the toughest parts of my city in West Sacramento, in a way that the state can't do very effectively, but regions can see neighborhoods that are in need of investments and places and people that we're able to achieve not just equality but equity in the outcomes that we're driving at the regional scale. So I think it's a really exciting time, but it will also mean that players other than college presidents and faculty leaders come to the table too, and that community groups and city council members and others start to get engaged and to speak up and to pipe up and to show up at the table around planning for these regional collaboratives across these different silos.
So, you bring up an interesting point. You said earlier, Christopher, for those who aren't aware, California is one of 2 states in the country that lacks a coordinating board. Many years ago, Governor Brown divested in the California Post-Secondary Education Commission, which had been criticized for not necessarily being as effective as it could be in helping to ensure intersegmental coordination and action across the state of California. How do you see in this regional collaborative model an equity of regional participation in advancing this agenda? We know that some regions are much more inclined to lean in than others.
Yeah, that's right. And it is a competitive grant, but not really. I mean, all these grants are competitive, but not really. Which is to say, there is going to be a grant in each of these regions. In the Eastern Sierra region, for example, doesn't have a UC or CSU campus, it's going to get a grant, and it's going to be significant. It's the question of once they can come up with the right plan. I think one of the getting to the point you're talking about in terms of who's at the table, that one of the things I think is exciting, maybe it's by luck, maybe it was the master strategy of the legislature and governor, but the fact that this $600 or $700 million, the Community Economic Resilience Fund, is bringing together the folks just like you and me back when you were in the IDEA program at the Great Valley Center. A disparate set of unlikely partners invited to the table, and not just invited, but with the resources to make to pay for their participation and to support their participation. And those folks coming to the table for those Economic Resilience Fund grants are going to should change the nature of what is proposed at the regional scale for the K-16 money too. So there's a lot of resources in those funds, and then a lot of foundations are also supporting capacity building. So if you're in if you're in any region in California, but particularly in those regions that don't normally do a lot of this regional work, there are capacity dollars out there, both inside the grants themselves and from major philanthropies that are supporting this work all across California.
And I just want to underscore a point that you made, Christopher. It is not just the traditional stakeholders, the institutions, the college presidents, the faculty leaders. We're talking about this work really moves with that unlikely group of stakeholders that include our business partners, our civil rights partners, our community advocates. And that nicely transitions to a question that we got from a community member. They want to know, what can the average citizen do to help move this work forward? What kind of advocacy would be most useful and helpful?
Well, I think that we've talked about many initiatives that are happening out there, but I mean, you know this better than I do. Most legislators aren't hearing about these topics from their constituents, unless and until you have my daughter's ready to go to UCLA and she can't get in, and suddenly I've become a higher. I know as much about higher ed as I do about COVID vaccines and wars. I've suddenly become an expert in higher ed policy. But the rest of us have to speak up all the time. And legislators who are doing this work need to know that somebody cares in the community. So it sounds simple, but simply pointing to one of the reports from the campaign or to the governor's compact or whatever, and writing to your local legislator or to a letter to the editor if those things still exist, in ways that contribute to the public dialogue, so that the legislature, they don't need to be convinced necessarily, but they need to know that they're on the right track, because there's so many other priorities that could consume their attention. So chances are your local legislator is doing the right thing, but they need to know that you actually care about this. So I think that's number one. And then second is, if you are engaged in other parts of society, if higher ed is not your daily work, then think about ways to bring those parts of society to the table. Are you working at the Urban League? Are you a union activist? Or are you working with Latino grandmothers in West Sacramento trying to launch a new food closet program, or whatever it might be? How can you insert yourself into these tables at the regional scale in particular, in ways that will help to reshape the way higher education works to serve California as it is today and not as it was 50 years ago?
Outstanding recommendation. So Christopher's saying you need to make these priorities known to policymakers, to your assembly member, to your senator. Don't assume that he or she already has this on the long list of priorities and issues that they're tracking. And no matter what role you occupy, make sure that you insert yourself and ask for a seat at the table, because your work is important to forming that regional agenda that then feeds into that statewide attainment goal and the compacts. So Christopher, one last question before we go into our lightning round. And this is really related to the myriad of roles that you've held over the course of your illustrious career. You've had many roles both in and out of education. But since we're talking about educational equity today, would love to know, of those roles that you've occupied, from a committee consultant in the legislature to a commissioner with WICHE to serving in various roles as a consultant for higher ed and an elected office, what is the role as it relates to educational equity that you are proudest of, and why?
I've tried them all. Every role that there is in higher education, I've tried. But really, the first professional one that I did, which was working for the Assembly Higher Education Committee, I happened to, I was the first staff director for the Higher Education Committee, and the chair was a guy named Tom Hayden.
Wow. Tom Hayden was my husband Arsenio's mentor. That's incredible. I didn't know this, Christopher. I learned something new today.
I was his 22-year-old higher education committee director, and the breadth of his activism and of his vision, and obviously his the role that he's put in the history of progressive movements in California, while also running an agency trying to figure out how to move the needle on higher education, taught me an enormous amount about the interplay of vision and aspiration and policy and tactics and politics, in both good and bad ways. But I learned a lot in that space, but also because he pushed so hard on disruption, on things that were completely unpopular. So he gave me the portfolio to work on tuition, non-resident tuition and financial aid for undocumented students, which was an absolute third rail. You could not talk about it in politics back then. My roommate at the time happened to be a young assembly fellow named Marco Firebaugh, who was later elected to the assembly and was the author of AB 540, it ultimately helped to lead us to resolving at least some of the worst parts of this problem. But the going at that fight over and over again when it was completely impossible, when Governor Newsom and the legislature had zero interest and we knew we were going to lose, and we kept going at it legally, courts-wise, bill after bill after bill, and then won on something that was incredibly important for a community of folks who had no voice whatsoever in the political system. I'm still the most proud of it, and maybe it was because I didn't know that it was so impossible, but I was very proud of that moment. And that all the way to today, and the work I'm doing at Institute for the Future right now, I think kind of brings that together, because I've having worked in the legislature, well, maybe it's the college administrators. I should go do that for a little while. Maybe it's being a faculty member. That's how you really make change. What I'm doing now with the Institute, in part, we just released a report on kind of envisioning what this regional multiversity might look like, is trying to bring that all together, but also marry it with the experience and the perspective of city government and as a mayor, relooking at higher education again. Because I'll tell you this one last frustrating thing about higher education, which is I come back to higher education after being there for a while professionally, and we're still talking about Common Core numbering. We're still talking about basic funding of the Pell Grant program. While I was away, I was working on climate change. I was working on electric vehicles, around banning single family zoning, around sprawl, a whole host of issues where as a society and in policy we've made enormous leaps. Yeah. And then I've come back to higher ed and it's like, well, think we could do Common Core numbering. Like, how is it possible that we're so complacent, we're so self-satisfied?
Yes.
Sometimes in higher education, that the height of our aspiration about what we can really do and what we can transform and how many lives we can uplift. How do we not hold ourselves to a higher standard in that space? And so now I'm trying to bring those experiences together to try to impel more profound action within the higher education community.
Yes. Why do we accept the status quo when we could innovate without limits? Absolutely, Christopher. And proud to say that the campaign sponsored legislation last year, after trying for more than a decade to create a common course numbering system for community colleges. So we're going to jump right into our lightning round. So for those of you who are joining us for your first lunch break, this is a fun opportunity for us to jump through a set of questions where Christopher will have to respond with only seconds of thought. So Christopher, I am going to jump right in. The first is an easy one. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee. Okay. Second, what's on replay on your iTunes playlist?
Adele, 30.
Love it. Love it. Me too. Number of languages spoken?
I can only really claim English, maybe Spanish and French, although I'm working on German, Swahili, and Turkish.
Never lack ambition, Christopher. Favorite holiday?
Cesar Chavez.
Beautiful. Most used emoji?
It's probably a tie between hearts and tears of joy or laughter.
The last book you read?
The last book I read is called Hurricane Lizards and Plastic Squids. And I'm on a little tear right now of reading about urban species in urban places and all of the forgotten ecosystem diversity that exists in cities. As we think about biodiversity, but also around climate change and its impact on like health and pests and what can be grown for food, for example, how radical changes in the places that we live are happening right now, and we're not noticing because we're mostly focused on the Arctic when we talk about climate change and species.
So repeat that title again, because my husband has a birthday coming up, and I think I now have a present.
It's called Hurricane Lizards and Plastic Squid.
Hurricane Lizards and Plastic Squid.
And a good companion to it is a book called Darwin Comes to Town.
Love it. Love it. The most memorable vacation destination?
Home.
And anybody who knows Christopher Cabaldon knows that you could do a where in the world is Christopher Cabaldon, so that's probably true. Common thought or last thought that usually enters your head before you go to sleep?
now the thought that I go to sleep with is what I reflect back on today, because I'm having left office as mayor. I'm doing like 1,000 different fellowships and other kinds of activities and projects, and trying to figure out what brings me joy, to use a 2020s term. And so before I go to bed, I try to reflect on just on today. Was today a good use of my time? Was it a good use of the days that I have in my life in terms of making an impact in the world? That's why I think a lot about this higher ed versus climate change question. Like, what's really worth leaning into? Where are the real opportunities? But also, did I play enough games today? Did I spend 16 minutes instead of just 15 with a friend at coffee? In a way that I never used to do. The mayor's office, and the vice chancellor's office, and whatever, you also always used to drive everything about I was just following along with the life that I had. And now I'm trying to be more intentional and use my thoughts as I go to bed about reflecting and appreciating, and then thinking about how to keep enjoying.
Reflection, intentionality, and appreciation. That's a good way to close your eyes at night. Last lightning round question, because I don't think we could go through this without asking, what is your favorite clothing accessory, and why?
That's right here. I'm one of the original wooden bow tie guys.
I love the bow
tie. They always start a conversation no matter what. They're easy to maintain. I don't have to worry about learning how to tie them.
It's my favorite accessory too. I'm going to get one for my little son. So Christopher, I'm going to close out today's conversation with asking you a question that I think is probably on the minds of many of our viewers this afternoon. Christopher, we often ask our guests on the Lunch Break series what they would like their legacy to be. And I think that this is an appropriate question for you. Christopher Cabaldon, what's next, and what do you hope your legacy to be one day?
So on the first question, I don't know what's next. I'm figuring that out a bit day to day. And then the legacy question is really interesting to me, because every day I get up and go get my coffee or walk and see some friends. I live in a place where I was mayor for 20 years that has been completely transformed and rebuilt, but all with the same people, right? It's not like it's been gentrified away. It's the same place. So, and it has this like amazing education program that we put in place, and I've worked on a million bills in the Capitol and what have you. I feel like if I were to get hit by a streetcar tomorrow, my legacy is I'm satisfied with it, which is why I now feel like it's okay for me to pick up a game or watch something on TV that I never would have done before, because I was so goal and achievement oriented, and I still am. I can't help it. That's why I'm working in these other languages. But legacy is not what drives me at this point. It's like, what is the impact that I'm making day to day? And then just as important, maybe more so, is how am I, that Jesse Ryan that I met for the very first time, how am I helping younger people, but not always younger people? Am I helping others who have big dreams and vision and want to put in the hard work and take up the fights? How do I help them with the bit of experience and all the battle scars and what have you I have? How do I give them hope, but also give them the tools in order to really take that vision and make it into action, and into results? And so I'm more focused on how do I help others build legacies that are worthwhile, than I am on necessarily trying to augment mine more.
Beautifully stated, Christopher. Well, we are wrapping up this hour of our Take a Lunch Break with Christopher Cabaldon, Mayor in Residence. And I just want to thank Christopher for spending this afternoon with us. As you know, he is a fascinating individual, and this was a remarkable conversation. Excited to see where his journey takes him next. But to close out the conversation, want to just really express our gratitude, Christopher, for the generosity with which you give your time, the fact that you want your legacy to be mentoring others. We have learned so much from you over the years, and appreciate your wisdom as we think through a North Star for higher education attainment in California. We appreciate your partnership as we continue to do this very difficult work of ensuring racial equity for students across the state. And for those of you who caught the end of this program, this will be available by recorded version online shortly. So grateful that you took took a pause from your busy activities of the day to join this conversation with Christopher Cabaldon, and we hope to see you soon on our next lunch break series in higher education, Fascinating Conversations with Leaders. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.